Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Kay Rodolfi, a member of the City Club Board and co-chair of the Advancement Committee. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Marlon James, winner in the fiction category for the 80th Annual Anisfield Wolf Book Awards. The Anisfield Wolf Book Awards were established in 1935 by Cleveland poet and philanthropist Edith Anisfield Wolf in honor of her father, John Anisfield, and her husband, Eugene Wolf. As stated on the awards website, the awards, quote, recognize books that have made important contributions to our understanding of racism and our appreciation of the rich diversity of human cultures. The Cleveland Foundation, which is the world's first community foundation, has administered the award since 1963. The City Club is proud to partner with the Cleveland Foundation to provide a forum for winners of the awards. Previous Anisfield Wolf Book Award winners in the fiction category include Langston Hughes for Simple Takes a Wife in 1954 and Toni Morrison for Beloved in 1988, among dozens of others. And today, we add Marlon James to this list of illustrious authors. Mr. James was born in 1970 in Kingston, Jamaica, the son of a police detective and lawyer husband. He credits his mother's perceptiveness in the volatile decade after his birth for informing A Brief History of 7 Killings, a novel that hinges on the assassination attempt of Bob Marley in December of 1976. In addition to winning this year's Anisfield Wolf Prize, the book received the 2015 American Book Award, the Minnesota Book Award, and the OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature, and was a finalist among the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction, and it landed squarely on at least 20 Best Book of the Year lists. A Brief History of 7 Killings is an epic chorus in the round, with some 30 narrators, each telling their story as it intersects with the singer, as James calls the reggae legend over the book's 700 pages. In a review from the New York Times, the story is described as, quote, a kind of trampoline bouncing off that terrible event into a multi-layered choral inquiry into Jamaican politics and poverty, into race and class, and into the volatile relationships between the United States and the Caribbean. Mr. James's earlier book, The Book of Night Women, received the Dayton Literary Prize in 2012, the Minnesota Book Award again, and an NAACP Image Award. Like A Brief History of 7 Killings, it also was a finalist for the National Book Critics Prize, Circle Prize. A graduate of the University of West Indies and Wilkes University, Mr. James has taught creative writing at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota since 2007. This fall, he will be the Master Writer in Residence at the California College of the Arts. He will also begin collaborating with screenwriter Eric Roth on the adapted screenplay of A Brief History of 7 Killings for HBO. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the City Club, I'm pleased to present today's speaker, Marlon James.
Thank you, City Club. Thank you, Cleveland. It's so great to be here. I keep looking on the website, City Club website, at who has spoken here before, and I'm like, no, I'm not intimidated at all. No, it's like Barack Obama. Who's Barack Obama? It's like, my name is cuter. It's like, in the program, I think it says the life and literature of Marlon James, and that sounded so big and heavy and unwieldy. And I really thought about it. And what I actually want to talk about is why I write to not write. That I actually write in the service of not writing again, which sounds sort of weird. I remember one of the things that Jean Reese said. She says she writes to write over and she writes to write off. And I always remembered that because this is stuff I realize in hindsight. I don't think I'm a writer at a mission, and I'm very suspicious of writers on missions. Because sometimes, and I can only speak really to the Jamaican experience, a lot of times those writers end up being very didactic, sometimes very patronizing, and a lot of times actually not very good. And it was a discovery to me that I am a writer of issues, that there are things that I want to get off my chest. Because, nothing is ever easy in fiction, and it shouldn't be. especially if you come looking for easy answers. And I don't think fiction serves that purpose. And I realize that as a writer, my job for the most part is to just ask better questions. And I render questions. And one of the biggest questions I keep asking is, why are we asking the same questions? Why are we still dealing with some of the same things? And I am saddened to ask those questions and to still be in a situation where I'm asking those questions. There's this great album that U2 came out with in 1982, I think, called War. And War, almost before we get to the first chorus, Bono sings, "How long must I sing this song? How long must we sing this song?" It's in the song Sunday Bloody Sunday. And the thing about War, and what was so radical and profound about it, is that here is a band singing songs, wishing for the day that they will never have to sing those songs again. And that's a great thing about that album. It's a protest album longing for the day that they'll never have to sing that. And I realized that one of the things that I do as a writer, one of the things that, if there is a mission, I think one of the missions that I have is to write towards my own irrelevance. To write to the point where you don't have to write about these songs anymore. Trust me, Bono is not happy when people say his album is still relevant. Pete Seeger was never happy to hear his songs are still current. He didn't write them for that reason. I was listening to this album from Public Enemy called Fear of a Black Planet, and people said, these issues are still relevant today. That makes nobody happy. That we write towards our own irrelevance. We sing these songs in the hope of never having to sing them again, or at least sing them from this sort of nostalgia. Remember those days. But these things are still with us. And again, I don't think I've ever written with a conscious idea that these were in my head and these are the things I'm wrestling with. I was just a writer trying to make sense of the world. And I think in trying to make sense of the world, those things sort of come out at you. I think if you're going to be a writer in the world, you are troubled by what's going on in it. Even if as a writer, your main job is to make sense of it. And I think that's one of the things that I try to do. I'm not a peaceful writer. In fact, I've been called a violent writer. Some people go, mm-hmm. My characters are troubled and they're troubling. Sometimes they cause violence. Sometimes they have to live with it. Sometimes they have to get past it. Sometimes they have to endure it. But I do think quite a few of them long for peace. And I think as a writer, I long for it as well. And as I said, I've never considered it sort of a mission. I really thought as a writer, and to an extent I still think, that I'm just here to tell a good story. And that's still the first thing that guides me when I'm writing. My first novel is called John Crow's Devil, and it's about religion run amok in a Jamaican village. The very, very short synopsis is there are two preachers with their own cults of personality fighting for the soul of a village. One is an alcoholic and one is demon-possessed. It's a family story. And I thought I was just making this up. One, because actually it's very much a gothic horror story, and I love gothic horror stories, and I love goths. But later in that year in Jamaica, this deacon of a church was arrested and charged with rape. And it's a very despicable story, and I'm not going to recount the details. But his pastor had a press conference. And she was appalled. She was absolutely livid that somebody questioned her authority. Because as far as she was concerned, she dealt with the matter in the spirit. She dealt with it. She spoke to God. It was settled, and she solved it. She settled it, and she pronounced judgment. And the idea that somebody, whatever was even the law of the country, superseding her authority, she found grossly offensive. And it hit me that these type of sort of cult of personalities, this sort of idea where, well, because of my religion, I'm an instrument of God's law, which supersedes even justice, is still pretty relevant. I would think would have solved all of this when Henry II did the Council of Clarendon in 1664. But we're still dealing with it. Now we have Kim Davis. No, I'm not going to go into that. But I didn't start out writing this book thinking, oh my God, we still have to be dealing with these things. But we are. And I think as a writer, even if it's not your mission to speak about issues, you end up being engaged with them anyway, if for no other reason to bring different shades of meaning to it. Because even with this novel, I wasn't seeking for easy answers. I wanted to tell a story, but I was also very concerned with how religion can, or any form of sort of behavior, if left unchecked, can become sort of cult. I was trying to explain to somebody, the difference between a religion and a cult and a church's door is always open. A cult's door isn't open. And that sort of coming out of a colonial society, and I'm coming from Jamaica is a former British colony, and in some ways we're still throwing off those shackles. And one of the things I was very concerned about, and I think we still have it, is when we throw off one colonial master for another. When we throw off one form of bondage for another. So again, these are things I realize that I'm concerned about in hindsight. I don't think I thought about it when I was writing. My second novel, The Book of Night Woman, is set between 1785 and 1801. It's about a bunch of women who plan an all-female slave revolt. And again, I wrote this because I thought it was a great story. I wrote it because I wanted to give slave women some guns to cause some trouble. And a lot of it was also based on stuff I came across in reading and in research. Richard Dunn is here, and Sugar and Slaves is one of those formative texts if you're studying history in the Caribbean. It's just one of those things that start to create that whole germ of an idea in my head. But I also realized in writing this novel that one of the things that I was resisting or speaking to is what I call the atrocity timetable. And the atrocity timetable kind of works like this. When people who didn't experience an atrocity are not living in the consequences of it or the legacy of it, still feel the need to tell you when it's time to stop talking about it. And that was something that it was one of the things that I realized I really sort of responded against. And I thought, the idea that you get to tell somebody when to talk about it. I don't think, to use another example, I don't think you get to tell a rape victim when to stop talking about her rape. I don't think you get to tell any victim of any atrocity or any injustice enough now. Especially something like slavery. And the thing about slavery that I find really interesting is I always call it the great over-discussed, undiscussed topic. That we may think we have said some stuff about it, but we actually haven't discussed it yet. We really haven't. We really haven't had that sort of discussion. One of the things I was told, and funny enough, I was actually asked by Black Jamaicans, why dwell on it? Why dwell on the past? And there are all sorts of reasons. But one of the things that struck me was this insistence on telling people who ended up on the bad side of atrocity to get over it, while people who lived on the benefits of atrocity were still enjoying them. So my friend Johnny could be talking to me about, why are you writing a slavery book? And I go, Johnny, we're talking on the veranda of your plantation. We are looking over at your cane fields. This is a very good friend of mine, but we both know each other's legacies. I'm like, we are looking at a cane field, dude. And I don't see you're not about to sell it, and I'm not telling you to sell it. But I'm saying there is that history there, and I don't think we can sort of ignore it. I have very weird reactions when I go to Liverpool. Because when I go to Liverpool, I see great buildings, but I also see dead bodies. You know, I have weird reactions when I go to Bristol. I get very territorial when I go to the Tate. I was like, why should I pay to come here? It's the thing about messing with the past is Faulkner is right. It's not gone. It's not even past. And in writing that book, I was very concerned about the culture of forgetting. And I was reading somewhere recently, and I can't remember who said it, so I won't take credit for it. When this person came to the conclusion that coming to terms with the past and forgetting the past can sometimes feel the same way. And I was really, I was really haunted by this, and I really set about to try to not forget that. Again, I don't think I wrote this with a sense of mission that this is what I'm going to do and we must always relive this. For one, that ignores that there's some fantastic work that has been done on this and continues to be done on this. But I really found that as a writer, I think I'm really attracted to mysteries, even mysteries that shouldn't be mysteries. And one of the mysteries is, why don't we talk about slavery? Why is it something that we every year it's this wound that we think we should just sort of move over? And that becomes a mystery to me. It becomes something to examine. The third book I wrote, the reason why I'm here, is called A Brief History of Seven Killings, and it's the very loose description of it, the Library of Congress description. This is not the Library of Congress description. It's basically what happened to the men who tried to kill Bob Marley. And again, it was me trying to do some sort of literary detective work. Again, because it was one of those issues that we in Jamaica just don't talk about. It's this I think roughly 5 minutes, maybe 5.5 minutes in Jamaican history that changed everything, and nobody talks about it. Even in the recent documentary on Marley, which some of you may have seen, it's something that almost is a postscript. And there are lots of reasons why we don't talk about it. There are people who are worried about my health because I talked about it. Because the reason why we don't talk about it is that it's almost a stitch. It's part of a stitch. So if you pull it, you're going to end up disrupting the whole fabric. So nobody wants to pull. Nobody wants to grasp at any thread because they don't know what's going to end up being pulled, what sort of ripples we're going to cause in that fabric. As a writer, that to me is almost cocaine. You don't want to talk about it? Oh yeah. My favorite part of the discussion is when they trail off. Is when they were about to say something and didn't say it. And my mom can speak to this because there are times, because she was a detective, so I got used to reading the stuff she wouldn't tell me. Be like, don't go in that neighborhood next week because ... So I spend the rest of the week finding out what's the ... I get, I could have been a detective in another life. I had lots of great training. But to come back to the Marley thing, why it haunted me is, I was 6 years old in 1976. So I didn't really know much. If you're 6 years old, you're in a world of wonder. Conflict for me is, who do I like better, Starsky or Hutch? Listen, this was very serious. Don't take this serious. One was a terrible singer, the other one was cool. Anyway, but again, and part of it may be because of the nature of my parents' jobs, there was something about that event that even at 6, I knew things were different. If you're a kid, you may not understand anything, but you know when your parents are scared. Because you've never seen that before. You remember the first time you see your parents scared. Because there's certain things you don't expect from parents, including fear. And that I remembered. Again, it was one of these sort of unanswered sort of mysteries, and it has haunted me ever since. Not even the direct event itself, I wasn't there. And I was really more concerned. I really was more concerned about Starsky versus Hutch. But an event that my parents would talk about in hushed tones, two people who never speak in hushed tones. My parents were never shy about talking about everything right in front of us. So people thought, man, you must have been reading tons of books. I'm like, no, my parents just wouldn't shut up. And what happened in looking at this event is all these things that kept spinning out, all these theories about Bob Marley's assassination, everything from he was becoming too symbolic, a symbol of independence and freedom, and he was becoming too much of a freedom fighter, especially for basically a guy who was basically a rock star. There's also, the theory that one of the things that was happening during Marley's time is that a lot of his friends were concocting a lot of cons at his house, and some of those got out of control and people got violent. I didn't want to solve these mysteries. I just wanted to render them. Because at the core of it, I really just wanted to make sense of the 70s. The novel goes all the way to 1991. And the reason being that the consequences of several aspects of the 70s, including the Cold War, extended that far. 1976, more than any other year, is a year we entered the Cold War, we being Jamaica. That was a year, you have to imagine, a year where in the space of the entire year, Henry Kissinger, Mick Jagger, Carlos the Jackal were all in the same space. And we only know of Carlos the Jackal because we know somebody who used to date him, and she was quite stunned that she was dating an international terrorist. I was like, there's your memoir right there. We have Henry Kissinger, we have Mick Jagger, we have Keith Richards. It was a really, really explosive time that makes absolutely no sense. Again, that is just manna for me as a writer, trying to make sense of that. And I really didn't, I also didn't try to solve who tried to kill him and what. I just wanted to render all of those questions. And I thought about that actually recently. Is rendering my job as a writer to render questions, is that enough? And I thought about that recently because just 2 days ago at Jericho Brown's reading, somebody asked a question about what else has he done. Has he been a part of marches? Has he done any sort of civil action or so on? And I think Jericho was being really gracious with the answer, whereas I was not being very gracious in my head. Because they were pushing for what sort of activism has he done? And I thought, but he's done the work. By writing that poem, by situating that situation, by giving the sort of text that can become a tool all over the world, he's done his work. And the truth is, a writer, a person who is speaking truth to power, at least we hope they're speaking truth to power, has already done the work. When Picasso painted Guernica, he already did the work. He doesn't have to then write a manifesto about the painting. He did the work. When Toni Morrison writes Beloved, she did the work. And I think as a writer, by illuminating issues, if not necessarily trying to solve them, that I hope I've done the work. And one of the things I wanted to throw out is a question, actually. And it's a question I ask people who then usually ask me if I've done the work. I ask them, but have you done yours? And because I've been thinking about racism quite a bit, and especially in light of this award of racism and injustice and our response to it. And a friend of mine, Caitlin, had this, she had a Facebook post where she talked about one of the problems with, say, racism in this country or injustice is that we look at them as moral failings, that racism is a moral failure. And the problem with looking at racism or injustice as moral failures is that then all you have to be is not immoral. All you have to be is not racist. And the problem with that is non-racism and anti-racism are two totally different things. Non-racism becomes, with non-racism, what you're doing is you're elevating passivity to a moral value. And I've really thought about this because we respond to a lot of injustices that way. Say, for example, oh, good, I'm making sure I don't go over. Say, for example, we substitute racism for, say, child abuse. This is how non-child abuse works. I don't do it. I didn't vote for somebody who did it. I don't buy books about it. I am not an abuser. You know, you go back to racism. I didn't vote for a racist. I didn't own slaves. I'm not from the South. I'm not burning any crosses. What we've come to is this point where a whole series of non-actions have become legitimate. So we've legitimized the act of doing nothing. There's a difference, again, I said, between non-racism and anti-racism. It's an entire moral stance, and it's an entire way of living the world, defining yourself by what you're not doing. And there has to be more to it than that. I'm just a writer. I like to think the thing I'm doing is writing. But usually when I'm asked the question, what are you doing beyond that? I go, but what are you doing now? And that's something I leave because it's a forum and I like to start fights. What is your whole response to the injustices of the world simply the sort of self-conceit that, well, at least I'm not doing it. And I am not encouraging it, and I'm not voting for it. These not, don't. Well, instead of what you're not doing, what you should ask yourself is just, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? My answer to that is, I just write. And honestly, I think that's the best. It's the one thing I know how to do. It's the one thing, if you were to ask me, if you were not able to do this, what you'd be doing. And after all these years, I'm still stumped because I have no answer to that question. And as a writer, I think the more I write and the older I get is the wider my eyes are open. And it's the more stuff that's out there that I can't turn away from. And that's why I do it. And I am going to stop right there. Well, yes, thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Really nicely done.
Thank you.
Hello again. I'm Dan Malthrop, Chief Executive here at the City Club. And you like moved this whole podium. It's like, all right. Today at the City Club, we're enjoying a forum featuring Marlon James, the 2015 Anisfield Wolf Book Award winner for fiction. We encourage you to organize your questions for Mr. James now and remind you, too, that your questions be brief and to the point. If you're joining us via radio broadcast or webcast and would like to tweet a question, we encourage that. You can tweet it at the City Club. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via the radio and web broadcasts provided by our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many other radio stations across the region and country that carry City Club programs. Television broadcasts and radio broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Be sure to join us next Friday, September 18th, as the City Club welcomes William Griswold, the 10th director of the Cleveland Museum of Art, for a conversation on his plans to shape the future of one of America's leading art museums. For more information about our upcoming and past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Our community partner for today's program is the Anisfield Wolf Book Award. Thank you very much for your support. And our bookseller is A Cultural Exchange. We welcome guests at tables hosted today by the Cleveland Foundation. Thank you very much for your support. Additionally, we welcome students to today's forum from Bard Early College High School, Bard High School Early College. Thank you very much. Bard High School Early College, the Cleveland School of Architecture and Design at John Hay, the Cleveland School of Science and Medicine at John Hay, JFK Eagle Academy, Shaw High School, and the Whitney M. Young Gifted and Talented Leadership Academy. Could you all please stand to be recognized? Student participation is made possible by a generous gift from the Jeffrey David Epstein Memorial Fund. We thank you very much for your support. And now it's time for your questions for Mr. Marlon James. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests, and holding our microphones today are City Club Content Associate Teddy Eisenberg and Director of Programming Stephanie Jansky. Our first question, please, Mr. James.
Good afternoon.
I'm back.
Mr. James, I'm so glad you're here. I taught school for 40 years and ran across many, many students who would always say, I hate writing. My question is, if you were presented to a room of students, all of whom hated writing, how would you defend the importance of writing to that class of students?
Well, the first thing I'd say is if you don't write, somebody's going to write for you. I think it was, I can't remember, it may have been Terry Tempest Williams who talked about that if you don't write your stories, somebody will write them for you. And you might not like the version. And I think that, I think it's something like that, she said it. And I think also, because I come across students like that, even in posh private school where I teach, I don't think it ever occurs to them, or sometimes it does, that writing can be a way to unlock things in their head. Writing can be a way to speak about things that they never thought they could speak about. That writing can open up worlds that they never thought about. The first thing I usually get them to write is journals. So I usually, because they're not going to go and buy it. So I will, we're teachers. Half of our salary goes back to them anyway. So I will buy them journals and talk about, the whole idea of writing what you feel. And a journal is not a diary. You can cut and paste your favorite Jason Derulo lyrics. And you should be ashamed if you have favorite Jason Derulo lyrics. He's terrible. Come on. Anyway, put in your lyrics, put in your entries for that day or so on. What the first thing I try to do is to get over. I think sometimes they're actually intimidated by the idea of it. And I think sometimes, and especially with my students, I find they think they don't have anything to say. I was like, you have something to say. There's nothing wrong about writing about how you hated breakfast this morning. You got something to say. One other thing I also encourage is to think of events in the day like you're telling a story. And that can sometimes be really eye-opening for them, because they're not talking about how much they hated class. They said, no, I don't want to know that. Tell me everything, write everything down, and when I read it, I go, oh, you didn't like class today. So my experience with students is that they do like challenges, and they do like something that may seem kind of impossible if that spark is there, and I think that's it, is to look at it as something almost as you're about to embark on this sort of journey to discover yourself. I know that sounds very hippie-ish, but it's kind of true. I find that certainly with my students, they aren't even aware yet that they can surprise themselves. And I said, well, now you're going to find out. That's one of the great things about it. You're the only animal that can surprise yourself. So grab a pen and go. That's what I do. Yeah.
What made you decide to want to be a writer?
That is a good question because I cannot remember. I think I decided, I don't know if I decided, I think I realized, and it may have been around 1999, because I was always writing, and I think I realized then I was in advertising, and I was doing very well, and I had a book that I couldn't sell, because I'd gotten to the point where I rediscovered just writing, just for the sake of putting words down and just following one sentence with another. I was really drawn just by the art of it. And I realized I felt more fulfilled about that novel I couldn't sell than all the money I was making. And I think that's when I started to think, this is what I wanted to do. And but other than that, it hit me by accident. I really did have a moment when somebody asked me, if you weren't writing, what would you be doing? And as you can tell, I talk a lot. And I did not have an answer. And I think that's it. I think, not just writing, I think, you are in that sweet spot if what you're doing or what you want to do is the hardest work and the most fun at the same time. Then you're there. And it can be anything. But I think that's when I realized it, because it doesn't get easy and I don't mind. That's when I knew. But in terms of when that was, I have no idea.
Sorry. What was the most effective thing that made you to write books, like when you were a kid?
Reading. It's there are lots of. I mean, I've read tons of books, but I think for every writer, there are these books that make you go, "I want to do this." Gabriel Garcia Marquez has this phrase which I like when he says, "A writer." You come across a writer that gives you permission to write, and it's the writer that after that guy, go, "Oh yeah, I want to write." And for him, it was Kafka, and he read The Metamorphosis, where Gregor Samsa wakes up and realizes he's an insect. And he was like, "What is this? You can't do this. People don't go to sleep and wake up turned as insects." And he was outraged by it. And but it also, he realized, oh, wait, I can do that? So I remember reading Salman Rushdie's novel, Shame. And I'm paraphrasing, but there are parts in Shame where he would say things like, Marlon James, the character I will kill off on page 20, is coming down the street. I'm like, no, you can't do that. He would show like outright, he would talk about a character and go, what type of character is this? I was like, but you created him. I was just so outraged by that book. I couldn't believe, because I grew up very sort of, I read like Dickens and George Eliot, and I still love those books. But I had very, very specific ideas about what a book should be like. And this was just killing all of that. And it didn't, and then I realized after being outraged by it, like, oh, I can do this. I didn't know I could do that. So that was the book that gave me permission to write. So I think the single most important thing is reading. There are things as a teacher I just can't teach you. There are things you're just that's how everybody learns. I mean, Cormac McCarthy says books come out of books. And I think he's right. So it's reading. And not just reading the masterpieces of literature. There's so much you can learn from reading a bad book. I read 50 Shades of Grey so that you all wouldn't have to. This is the part where you say you're welcome. Well, I say you're welcome, you say thank you. It's as bad as you have guessed. It's pretty bad. There's actually a video of me reading it, but I won't give you the link. So even, bad books that people call bad that are not bad, like street lit, like crime fiction, you can learn from pretty much anything. Yeah. I'm looking back over here. I'm so glad all the students are asking me questions.
Are you saying basically like in justice there are limitations, and that in those limitations, surely but slowly in your novels, you're expressing it to your readers that these limitations can be showed or broken?
I sometimes go halfway with that question. I mean halfway with that statement, because I like the idea of leading people to make up their own minds. Which is not to say I won't gently nudge something, but I try not to be didactic with what I'm talking about. But at the same time, I've never flinched away from terrible things or outrageous things or all these sort of injustices. What I do is, I think sometimes one of the reasons why we don't respond to atrocities is that we have this very sanitized view of it. It's like what I call PG violence. You watch something like Superman, and he levels 2/3 of New York, but there's not a single casualty. Not a single person dies, but 2/3 of New York is obliterated because you can evacuate 8 million people in 10 seconds. I think by just shining a brighter light on sometimes these terrible things, and it's not just terrible things to write about. I think that one of the things that was very important for me when I was writing the slavery novel is how much humor is in it. And how much sometimes these slaves have to laugh at the life they're in. But I like to think that my job is to sort of just highlight them and then let other people, do or not respond to it. But I'm just sort of like, this is what's going on. Yeah. Oh, over here.
My name is Alfred Wilcox.
Hi, Alfred.
From the Cleveland School of Science and Medicine, and we've been studying archetypal criticism in our English 4 class. And my question to you is,
whoa. What is archetypal criticism? I mean, I know it, but I don't think anybody, yeah.
You want me to? It's a universal symbol, so like the Superman symbol.
Okay.
No matter where in the world, they'll be able to recognize it. So,
All right.
So
We're ready now.
Yes. So my question to you is, what symbols do you focus on in your work?
That is a good question. I don't know. I think sometimes when you're writing, those symbols happen by accident. I think I like to think that when I write, I trust my subconscious to be a better writer than I am. It's funny. I remember my first editor asked me, "Why is everything gleaming in your novel?" It's like, "What are you talking about? I hate that word." I say, "Well, if you hate it, it appears every 4 pages." Why is everything gleaming? So I'd never use that word again. I don't know. One of the things I think I learned from Ernest Hemingway is how symbolic gestures are. So that's something that's very important to me, what people are doing, especially if what they're saying doesn't go with what they're doing. So the way in which body language is really important to me, how people respond. So I do follow that sort of cues from people. Other than that, I don't know. I wait for the lit teachers who teach my book to talk about metaphors, and they're like, and the symbolism, the color red. And I'm like, yeah, that was deliberate. I have no idea what they're talking about. Yeah, but I think in a bigger sense, we do respond to sort of symbols and icons and so on. And I come from a country, especially in the 70s. For example, there was a huge symbolism to the colors green and orange. If you're green, you're Jamaica Labour Party, you're right wing. If you're orange, you're the People's National Party, you're socialist, you're left wing. So if your school color is orange and you're just wearing your tie, but you're going through a green neighborhood, you'll get jumped. My school was weird. My school we were epaulets, which was yellow and red. Somebody made the big jump. Oh, that must be orange. So we'd be going through a green neighborhood, and people are trying to jump us, and I go, "Your prime minister went to my school." It's like the head of your party went to my school. Leave us alone. But the symbolism. So it's still even if it doesn't appear in my book much, it's something that really drives us. Certainly in my country. I'm going back and forth. Let's go this way.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Isis Duncan. And one thing I was thinking is that I want to become a writer. I think it's very interesting. And whenever I'm writing, let's say it's a 5-page essay or just one sentence, I always ask myself, how do I feel about how I felt? And I feel like I feel satisfied. And so what I wanted to ask is, how did you feel about after you wrote your books?
I was so scared. But also, relief and fear, I think. Because it's not a short book. But I think I always feel kind of scared because as a writer, I like to push myself, write something I wouldn't write before. For a long time, my big taboo was not even anything sexual or obscene. It was, how do I write a tender love scene? Because we literary fiction writers tend to stay away from love because we suck at it. I think there was a sort of relief. I'd be satisfied with certain individual sentences. I go, yeah, that was a good sentence. But by and large, sometimes I'm just glad to be done with it. But I don't know. I think for example, I might give you a good example. This recent novel doesn't end, it stops. And it took me a good few weeks to accept that I'd reached the end. I'm like, no, this is the part where I write the big cosmic significance paragraph. This is the part where the sun sets on the empire and 2 people walk off and I'm going to talk about, and in the turgid miasma of our existence, blah, 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 stuff like that. And I just left it at somebody answering a phone call. It took me a very long time to realize it was done. And I think that for me is harder, knowing when I'm done, as opposed to how I feel when it's done. When I'm done, it's, honestly, I go through this kind of writing postpartum depression. And I get so depressed because I am a very immersive writer. That's all I do when I'm writing. Somebody asked me about breaks recently, and I'm like, I don't take breaks. I write straight through. It really did take me 4 years of constant writing. And I will emerge from that and look around and go, you guys had kids? It's like, you guys got married? When did that happen? And I usually get so depressed, I immediately start writing something else. I call it my rebound books. And they're terrible. They're all bad. Because I have to get back into the whole thing of not writing. So, yeah, it's really complicated reaching the end of something, I think. But after a while, you realize, yeah, I'm done with this thought. I'm done with it. So I think I just sort of have a relief at it being done. Than anything else. Yeah.
Hi.
Oh, we're going, sorry. Yeah. Hi.
My name is Destiny Deskin. I'm a freshman at Shaw High School. And my question for you is, we all know what fiction is, but what experience did you experience that led you to your perception of fiction? Meaning, so, more serious than it is fiction.
One of the things that I experienced, I was not just in Jamaica, some of it I experienced and some of it I read about, was just how surreal sometimes really unjust events could be. Just how sort of these type of events that if you didn't know they were a fact, you think somebody made them up. There's a sequence in my book, a police interrogation. I won't go into how they interrogate the suspects. It was just so ridiculous. I'm like, people are going to think this is the most fantastical part of the book, but it's actually true. Like, some of the craziest moments in my book are the ones I take from actual events. And I was always sort of drawn by that, this sort of how surreal our lives are. It makes no damn sense. And and how the writing is sort of figuring that out. I don't know if it was any sort of major event or sort of any particular real life event that made me wanna write. It really was falling in love with books and seeing how books can talk about the world. Like I was already writing when I read Toni Morrison, but it totally changed how I wrote after reading her. I was talking about this last night. How especially her two books, Sula and Song of Solomon, just changed how I looked at the world and how I wrote about it. So a lot of what shaped me as a writer was still the world of books. I mean, I was trying to get away from the world. I was trying to get away from reality for the most part. But I think through reading those books, I just had this better understanding of the world. I don't know if that answered your question at all. I'm going to hope. If not, he can ask me again. She was waiting for a while.
Hello, my name is Graham Coleman, and I was wondering, how do you feel about the racial injustices that are occurring right now with young black males?
Oh, we have another hour. Oh wow, how do I not feel about it? You know what? You could tell by my Facebook posts pretty much every day. Right now, I'm just trying to get a handle on this whole James Blake thing. Well, where he is. Claudia Rankine has that great poem where she talks about, but you're that guy. You're the guy who fits the description, because there's always a guy who fits the description. And it's just, again, it's something to be enraged about, but it comes back to what I'm saying, that too often our response is non-action. I'm not doing it. I'm not discriminating. I'm not beating up kids. I'm not killing black boys. It's not enough. And I think we do have to move from from non-racism and non-injustice to anti-racism and anti-injustice. That there is, and that doesn't mean I know what it means, and that might mean everybody has to figure that out. And it could be something as write another poem today. But I think we do have to get to the point where we're more involved and more angry about it, and actually more outraged about it. We can't wait until somebody we know, something happens to somebody we know. It's something I think we need to talk about. We need to, really deal with. And move beyond this sort of personal moral superiority that, well, at least we're not doing it. Yeah. Finally.
My name is Otis Edwards.
I mean, she has been waiting for so long. Yeah? Okay.
My name is Otis Edwards. I want to ask you, if you could thank anybody, if there's one person that you could thank for encouraging you to push on with your writing career, who would it be?
I don't know. I don't know if a writer has one person. My mother was very encouraging, even though she didn't understand head or tail. She'd be like, yeah, do whatever you want. You'd be surprised how much a parent just saying do whatever you want can be really encouraging. I think I'm not going to make a sweeping statement for every student, but there's always that teacher. There's always that the English lit teacher. And my teacher's name was Lloyd Bryan. Still remember his name. And before that, we were taught English lit in a very sort of way that guaranteed we would never read a book again. There's this great moment when you're reading, especially when you're really young, and you come across this book. And it's hard, but you're getting it. And I remember reading like Dickens. I'm like, this is hard, but I'm getting it. This is hard, but I'm getting it. Then you go to lit class, and I go, the significance of the theme of isolation in the pages 32 to 33. And you go, oh, God. Get me to physics. And so my teacher, Mr. Brand, was the first person who came in. I'm like, man, I am so envious of you all because you're about to discover Jane Austen. And I can't discover her anymore. And it didn't matter what Jane Austen read, just hearing that. He was like, I am so sad I can't be a student to remember the day when I just discovered Jane Austen. And the funny thing is, Pride and Prejudice is now one of my absolute favorite novels. There was a time I could actually recite it to you. No, I will not be doing that today. Because somebody asked me to do it. So yeah, I still remember him reminding me that literature is a world of wonder. And I didn't think about that before. I thought literature was something you do so you can get your exams, so you can get a job. Okay, that sounded weird. Like literature is gonna get so I still remember that. Other than that, especially if you're a bookish kid like me, they weren't necessarily people so much as books. It was being locked away in a library and reading even stuff like Laura Ingalls Wilder and reading books like The Railway Children, which nobody reads now. But just sort of being in this sort of left in that sort of world. But yeah, definitely it comes back. I'd say I think every writer can tell you about the lit teacher. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's two. The lit teacher I still remember my other lit teacher is Annette Leo as one of her first students, and she taught me Huckleberry Finn. She also taught me Hamlet, and I am the absolute boss on reciting Hamlet. So yeah, those are who I remember. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. I have a couple quick questions about your adolescence, your childhood and adolescence in Jamaica.
Yeah.
You mentioned the palpable fear that your parents felt, and that must have continued because things were very violent through the 80s at least.
Certainly up to 1980.
Up to 1980? Okay. I was in Kingston, the Siaga Manly competition that resulted in a lot of casualties, a lot of wars. But anyway, so you were young and you continued to feel your parents' fear. I was wondering how that influenced you in your, just your psychological development, your feeling of security.
Right.
And also, Jamaica is pretty homophobic, homophobic culture, and I was just curious how you were able to come, to terms with yourself and the culture.
So the violence to begin with, I think, funny enough, growing up middle class in Jamaica, I really didn't see a lot of violence. One of the people, one of the things, Jamaica deserves credit for a lot of things, but usually when we have that sentence, we're talking about reggae music. And I think one of the things is about Jamaica, should be said that its middle class has been reasonably stable for a pretty long time. That the thing is, you don't, especially growing up in Jamaica and growing up in a small country, you don't necessarily have to be around violence to feel it and to be under that atmosphere. And I think to come back to the fear, some of it wasn't necessarily that something will happen to you, but that it could. And I think, and I still use my mother as a gauge. For example, recently my mom started talking that way again. It's not this sort of it will happen, but it might. And certainly for my mom, who's a just the facts kind of former cop, she doesn't like those uncertainties. It's that kind of, we're in the possibility where nothing will happen at all, but it could. And I think in some ways that is just as bad. And I think that is the type of condition that I remember. The sort of, things are probably going to stay cool, but something could happen. And that certainly to me is the okay. Eventually, it can get intolerable because it's a fear that may be unfounded, but it's still there. The thing about homophobia in Jamaica, I like to tell myself at least it's not Uganda. But I'm going to wrap this up really quickly. People find different ways of dealing with it. One of the ways in which I think Jamaicans deal with it is just make a class shift. So if you just go, in a certain social group and get rich enough or so on, it will escape. But I think there's still that kind of fear. That said, we just had our Pride a few weeks ago. And it was basically the flash mobs all over Kingston because you don't want to stay around long enough for anybody to beat you. But at the same time, the idea that you could just explode on a scene in rainbow colors and celebrate, even if you were done in 30 minutes, I think it was a very, very big deal. And it's the first time I wish I was there. Yeah? Oh, I'm sorry. We can talk afterwards. Thank you.
Today at the City Club, we have been enjoying a forum with Marlon James, 2015 Anisfield Wolf Book Award winner. Thank you, Mr. James. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned. As James calls the reggae legend over the book's 700 pages. In a review from the New York Times, the story is described as, quote, a kind of trampoline bouncing off that terrible event into a multi-layered choral inquiry into Jamaican politics and poverty, into race and class, and into the volatile relationships between the United States and the Caribbean. Mr. James's earlier book, The Book of Night Women, received the Dayton Literary Prize in 2012, the Minnesota Book Award again, and an NAACP Image Award. Like A Brief History of Seven Killings, it also was a finalist for the National Book Critics Prize, Circle Prize. A graduate of the University of West Indies and Wilkes University, Mr. James has taught creative writing at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota since 2007. This fall, he will be the Master Writer in Residence at the California College of the Arts. He will also begin collaborating with screenwriter Eric Roth on the adapted screenplay of A Brief History of Seven Killings for HBO. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the City Club, I'm pleased to present today's speaker, Marlon James.
Thank you, City Club. Thank you, Cleveland. It's so great to be here. I keep looking on the website, City Club website, at who has spoken here before, and I'm like, no, I'm not intimidated at all. No, it's like Barack Obama. Who's Barack Obama? It's like, my name is cuter. It's like, in the program, I think it says the life and literature of Marlon James, and that sounded so big and heavy and unwieldy. And I really thought about it. And what I actually want to talk about is why I write to not write. That I actually write in the service of not writing again, which sounds sort of weird. I remember one of the things that Jean Reese said. She says she writes to write over and she writes to write off. And I always remembered that. Because this is stuff I realize in hindsight. I don't think I'm a writer at a mission, and I'm very suspicious of writers on missions. Because sometimes, and I can only speak really to the Jamaican experience, a lot of times those writers end up being very didactic, sometimes very patronizing, and a lot of times actually not very good. And it was a discovery to me that I am a writer of issues, that there are things that I want to get off my chest. Because, nothing is ever easy in fiction, and it shouldn't be. Especially if you come looking for easy answers. And I don't think fiction serves that purpose. And I realize that as a writer, my job for the most part is to just ask better questions. And I render questions, and one of the biggest questions I keep asking is, why are we asking the same questions? Why are we still dealing with some of the same things? And I am saddened to ask those questions and to still be in a situation where I'm asking those questions. There's this great album that U2 came out with in 1982, I think, called War. And War, almost before we get to the first chorus, Bono sings, "How long must I sing this song? How long must we sing this song?" It's in the song Sunday Bloody Sunday. And the thing about War, and what was so radical and profound about it, is that here is a band singing songs, wishing for the day that they will never have to sing those songs again. And that's a great thing about that album. It's a protest album longing for the day that they'll never have to sing that. And I realized that one of the things that I do as...
Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Kay Rodolphe, a member of the City Club Board and co-chair of the Advancement Committee. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Marlon James, winner in the fiction category for the 80th Annual Anisfield Wolf Book Awards. The Anisfield Wolf Book Awards were established in 1935 by Cleveland poet and philanthropist Edith Anisfield Wolf in honor of her father, John Anisfield, and her husband, Eugene Wolf. As stated on the awards website, the awards, quote, recognize books that have made important contributions to our understanding of racism and our appreciation of the rich diversity of human cultures. The Cleveland Foundation, which is the world's first community foundation, has administered the award since 1963. The City Club is proud to partner with the Cleveland Foundation to provide a forum for winners of the awards. Previous Anisfield Wolf Book Award winners in the fiction category include Langston Hughes for Simple Takes a Wife in 1954 and Toni Morrison for Beloved in 1988, among dozens of others. And today, we add Marlon James to this list of illustrious authors. Mr. James was born in 1970 in Kingston, Jamaica, the son of a police detective and lawyer husband. He credits his mother's perceptiveness in the volatile decade after his birth for informing A Brief History of 7 Killings, a novel that hinges on the assassination attempt of Bob Marley in December of 1976. In addition to winning this year's Anisfield Wolf Prize, the book received the 2015 American Book Award, the Minnesota Book Award, and the OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature, and was a finalist among the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction, and it landed squarely on at least 20 Best Book of the Year lists. A Brief History of 7 Killings is an epic chorus in the round with some 30 narrators, each telling their story as it intersects with the singer.
Right. And that's still the first thing that guides me when I'm writing. My first novel is called John Crow's Devil, and it's about religion run amok in a Jamaican village. The very, very short synopsis is there are two preachers with their own cults of personality fighting for the soul of a village. One is an alcoholic and one is demon-possessed. It's a family story. And I thought I was just making this up. One, because actually it's very much a gothic horror story, and I love gothic horror stories, and I love goths. But later in that year in Jamaica, this deacon of a church was arrested and charged with rape. And it's a very despicable story, and I'm not going to recount the details. But his pastor had a press conference, and she was appalled. She was absolutely livid that somebody questioned her authority. Because as far as she was concerned, she dealt with the matter in the spirit. She dealt with it. She spoke to God. It was settled, and she solved it. She settled it, and she pronounced judgment. And the idea that somebody, whatever was even the law of the country, superseding her authority, she found grossly offensive. And it hit me that these type of sort of cult of personalities, this sort of idea where, well, because of my religion, I'm an instrument of God's law, which supersedes even justice, is still pretty relevant. I would think would have solved all of this when Henry II did the Council of Clarendon in 1664. But we're still dealing with it. Now we have Kim Davis. No, I'm not going to go into that. But I didn't start out writing this book thinking, oh my God, we still have to be dealing with these things. As a writer, one of the things that, if there is a mission, I think one of the missions that I have is to write towards my own irrelevance. To write to the point where you don't have to write about these songs anymore. Trust me, Bono is not happy when people say his album is still relevant. Pete Seeger was never happy to hear his songs are still current. He didn't write them for that reason. I was listening to this album from Public Enemy called Fear of a Black Planet, and people said, you know, these issues are still relevant today. That makes nobody happy. That, you know, we write towards our own irrelevance. We sing these songs in the hope of never having to sing them again, or at least sing them from this sort of nostalgia, remember those days. But these things are still with us. And again, I don't think I've ever written with a conscious idea that these were in my head and these are the things I'm wrestling with. I was just a writer trying to make sense of the world. And I think in trying to make sense of the world, those things sort of come out at you. You know, I think if you're going to be a writer in the world, you are troubled by what's going on in it. Even if as a writer, your main job is to make sense of it. And I think that's one of the things that I try to do. I'm not a peaceful writer. In fact, I've been called a violent writer. Some people go, mm-hmm. You know, my characters are troubled and they're troubling. Sometimes they cause violence. Sometimes they have to live with it. Sometimes they have to get past it. Sometimes they have to endure it. But I do think quite a few of them long for peace. And I think as a writer, I long for it as well. And as I said, I've never considered it sort of a mission. I really thought as a writer, and to an extent I still think, that I'm just here to tell a good story.